Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Truth Defender podcast. We are coming to you from the greatest country in the world, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas. I'm your host, Paul Aguilar. We really appreciate you guys stopping in. If you guys are watching us on YouTube, please make sure y'all subscribe and hit that bell icon, as well as hit that thumbs up icon as well, so that way you guys can see more of our videos as well. And you can help us out with the algorithms on that as well. If you guys are on the go, you can always find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. If you guys want to follow us on social media, you know, we can be reached on Twitter at Defender Podcast, Instagram at Truth Defender Podcast, as well as Facebook at Defender Podcast. We have a Discord and a PayPal as well, which will be linked down below. We really appreciate you guys. If you guys are feeling generous, go ahead and give us a little something there so you can help us with the hardware and the software. As you know, that stuff's not cheap. And also, if you guys have any questions or comments for myself or our guests or topic recommendations, you can also email us at thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. Our next guest is an artist, biblical paranormal researcher, and VODcaster. Jason McLean's life has been consumed with the study of archaeology, cryptozoology, ufology, and astronomy in order to better understand the Bible, its teachings, and the one behind its creation. These passions have prompted him to create Society for the Investigation and Research of the Unexplained, S.I.R.U, and can be found every Monday at 6:30 p.m. on Texas Front Porch. You can find him on YouTube as well. That's co-host of Texas Front Porch, like I mentioned, live every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on the TRINITY Cryptid YouTube channel. You can also find his book, METROPLEX Monsters, Dallas Demons, Fort Worth GOATMEN, and Other Terror of the Trinity River, available on Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. We'll have all those linked down below. Without further ado, Mr. Jason McLean, how you doing, sir?
So far, so good. Paul, yourself?
Not too bad. Just trying to get situated here, like we were discussing off air. Some pretty crazy times going on as well.
Yeah.
With the whole voting thing, but you know, that all gets sorted out. But that's neither here nor there. Everybody can, if you guys want to follow that, you can go on the news or wherever you guys get your information. But today we're going to be talking about some creepy crawlies as well as some other kind of interesting things. Which is kind of odd. So here in Texas, I'm originally from West Texas, so I'm from El Paso.
Okay.
Right there on the Rio. And so we have all kinds of crazy things out there, like La Llorona and just all kinds of like weird stuff that you'd find out there. But I mean, growing up in Texas, I never heard of too many kind of like cryptids and like odd things out this way, especially now that I live here in Dallas. I've been here since 2013, so I'm not, originally from here, but it's just kind of crazy to really hear anything at all. I mean, what kind of stuff are we talking about out here?
Well, so that's an interesting question. First of all, we do have a Lechuza sighting, actually an assault that happened in Oak Cliff, which is in the southern side of Dallas.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the thing, right? We've got just a bit of, not everything per se. We've got Sasquatch, we've got living pterosaurs, and then we do have a few other physical cryptids that tend to be more aquatic in nature. Lake Granbury has old one eye, which is an aquatic lake monster.
Right.
And then we have an interesting sighting, that's recorded in the book. But there's some interesting sightings out of the Trinity of something that doesn't make sense. Then of course we have giant catfish and giant alligator gar. But then we have paranormal things. Everyone's got ghost stories. But then we have things like I mentioned, the Lechuza. We have goatmen. We have things that seem to be maybe goat man adjacent, right?
Right.
We've got a little bit of everything here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and it does seem like they shouldn't be here. You know what? The thing is, that was what was in my head when I saw a living pterodactyl when I was 12. I was in DeSoto, Texas, which is literally a suburb of the city of Dallas.
Right.
I saw it for 20 years. Even though I believed they were still alive, I didn't think they'd be here.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the big thing that's really happened over the last 10 to 15 years is with the rise of the internet, podcast shows. A lot of this information is getting out and people are now willing to talk about it. You don't have to dig very hard to find people who've had very bizarre encounters with one of these creatures that I've mentioned. You just have to ask around. It won't take you long before someone's like, well,
Yeah.
let me tell you about this thing that happened to me. The thing is, you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of the big thing. The big pressure is to keep this stuff silent. So no one wants to talk about it. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everyone sees one, but the thing is, you don't have to look very hard to find someone who's had some sort of really bizarre experience. And sometimes they do end up seeing these creatures. And the thing is, they just know that they can't talk about it.
Yeah.
What ends up, no one does. And then we're back to where we are right now, where you're like, I can't imagine these creatures being here.
Yeah. 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 It's like, I mean, so like I mentioned, I'm from El Paso, so you hear stories like all over the place. So I would have like uncles and cousins and stuff like that, and I'm especially living out like out on the ranch and stuff. So like
Oh yeah.
out in the desert, you would see things out there. And my father has a story about his dad, way back in the day, like in the 50s or something like that, they captured what appeared to be a witch at the time. So they like wrapped it up like in a sack, left it in the barn. Next morning they came back and there was like a woman inside the sack. So it was originally they had captured, it was an owl. So they captured it, wrapped it up in a sack, placed it in the barn. And then when they came back the next morning, it was a woman. So they, believed it was a witch, right? So
right, yeah.
So that was like way back in the 50s. But I mean, those kind of stories, especially like on the border, you would hear, or at least I would hear a whole bunch of stories like that. And like you just said, like out here, you would think that it's a bigger city and you wouldn't, really hear too much stuff like that. I was speaking with Dark Waters a few weeks back, and he was mentioning that there was reports of like Bigfoot and things like that out this way. But like you just mentioned, it would just seem kind of weird that being like in the big city, so to say, that you would actually see like anything of that, that nature out here.
Yeah. No, so let's talk about that for a second. Because here's the thing: in many respects, like you're not going to see a Sasquatch in downtown Dallas, right?
Right.
Like you're not going to see one crossing over at Dealey Plaza or anything like that.
Yeah.
But if you were to really look at the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex from a satellite, you'll notice there's a lot of green.
Yeah.
Basically, what we do is we live on these little concrete islands, right, that are connected by roads and highways, and that's it.
Yeah.
Wherever there isn't concrete, what we do, and I talk about this in the book, I call it the green wall. Just as an aside, like the book is really designed for people maybe they don't really know a lot about cryptozoology or the paranormal, so it's really designed for an open audience. But I guess your audience is going to be a little bit more in tune to this, right? There are two major themes that I think your viewers will find, or listeners will find very, very useful. And this is one of them, the green wall, right?
Right.
Just stop to think about every road you've ever seen in and around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, right? What do we do? Well, we build a road, and of course they're shaped like this, right? They're sort of concave or convex, concave, whatever. They're rounded so the rain runs off, right? They're designed to get that rain runoff. And then, of course, on the side of the road, it goes down a little bit because, again, we want the rainwater to go down and to be channeled away from the roads for safety. Well, what that does is it creates this well-watered area. And so you don't have to go very far from the road. There is a tree line that's a perfect straight line. Because what do? We cleared all the trees out of the way up to a point, and then we mow. Well, what that results in is a tree line in a green space where these trees have plenty of water. And then you have this brush that grows up. You have the tall grass that grows and these other brushes and small trees. You can't see into it. Yeah. That's the trick, is next to every road, next to every creek and every, just water runoff stream is this green wall that is impossible to see through. You could have whole armies marching through these green spaces, and if you're on the highway, you can't see it. If you're on a road, you can't see it because you can't see more than 2 feet into this. And in fact, where I had my sighting, that creek is the 10 Mile Creek. It is literally 15 or 20 feet into the limestone bedrock. But even today, if you were to walk, unless you get into a car and you're on a bridge that crosses over,
Right.
most areas you're not going to be able to see into that creek because of that wall. In fact, when I was out taking photos for the book, there's a walking path that the city has put in next to it finally, and it doesn't end up making it in the book per se, but I took photographs, and literally, unless you knew for a fact that it was there,
Right.
all you'd see was greenery. You wouldn't know that 5 feet beyond this line is a 20-foot sheer drop off.
Yeah.
But there's nothing to protect you because they don't feel the need to do that because it's so thick you couldn't make it through if you wanted to, right? So what we have are these little concrete islands surrounded by this green wall. And then once you get past the green wall, there are massive, expansive green spaces for these creatures to live. And you may say, well, but how do you hide a Bigfoot even in these green spaces, all this area?
Right.
Well, perfect example, or even the living pterosaurs. Well, let's look at hogs, feral hogs. Not the smartest bulbs in the drawer, right?
Yep.
I mean, don't get me wrong, they're smart. Pigs are a lot smarter than most people give them credit for. But these are not animals that go around thinking, how do I stay hidden from humanity?
Yeah.
Right? They're hogs. They will do what they do. Last best guess estimate is over 1,000 hogs, feral hogs, are active in Irving. And they cause thousands of dollars of damage every year. Now, for those who aren't maybe local, Irving is more or less just a continuation of the urban sprawl that is downtown Dallas. Like, Irving is basically just concrete at this point. And yet, because the Trinity River runs through it, there's that green space. We have a very large population of hog.
Yeah.
In fact, I used to have to drive through Irving all the time to go to work. There was a deer on the side of I-35 in Irving. And it's like, this is about as downtown as it gets, right? Unless you're literally in Dealey Plaza, that's downtown.
Yeah.
You can't even tell where Dallas ends and Irving begins, except for the fact that the roads turn into the surface of the moon. That's how bad they are. But the thing is, yet even in Irving, you can hide feral hogs. These are not small things. These are very large animals, powerful, dangerous animals. And most people never see them.
Yeah.
They see the damage they cause, but they never see the hog. So it seems almost counterintuitive, but in many ways, the way we've set up our entire lives, our civilization is designed to protect us from coming across these creatures. The only time we do is when one of us sort of crosses over into the other's domain.
Right. Yeah. So like, it's funny that you mentioned hogs. I believe it was sometime last year, there was a lady that got killed by a hog in the morning.
Down around Houston. Yeah.
So yeah, she was coming out of her house and like early in the morning, and then there was a hog. Yeah, that's sad.
Feral hogs are nothing to play with. This is okay. So this is not a cryptozoological conversation at this point, but
right.
which is fine. But people need to. That's the thing, is most people don't understand nature. What they understand is the garden, right? I wrote an article years ago about the difference between the garden and the jungle, right? Most people live their lives thinking of, when they think of animals, they think of their pets, or they think of domesticated cattle. They don't realize how vicious and wild the world really is. When they think of nature, they think of a garden. They don't think of the jungle. They don't understand what that life is like. So they don't really fully understand how dangerous a lot of these wild animals are, including deer. I mean, let's face it. If you run across a buck in mating season, it's likely to try and kill you.
Yeah.
And people don't think that way, but it's because we've become so unfamiliar with nature. I think that actually helps us, or helps these creatures hide even more, because now no one's really looking for them. Like, in many cases, you can find evidence that people ran across them more often 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, than we do today. Because with all the 7+ million people in our little metroplex, you'd imagine we'd run across them even more often, but we don't.
Yeah.
Because we're not looking for them. We don't know what to. We wouldn't. Most people don't even know when something's out of order.
Yeah.
Right. Like, as far as nature goes, because they're unfamiliar with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's. I mean, this whole metroplex area, it's kind of, for everybody that's like never been here, it's kind of, it's, I mean, it's all so close to each other, but it's still kind of spread out in a weird way,
Mhm.
where you still have to drive like 20, 30 minutes to get, somewhere, but it's still right there. But, you got like Fort Worth, Rockwall, stuff like that. But, yeah, so I guess we can jump into here a little bit. You mentioned you had a sighting of your own,
Mhm.
can you go over that for us?
Yeah. It was June 1992. So it's summer. I'm out there fishing in the 10 Mile Creek with a friend of mine. That's what we did. I'm pretty familiar with the animals that are in the area, right? Nothing
Right.
really stood out. But we're out there. It's getting about 10, 11 o'clock. He's like, he's going to go back and eat because we've been fishing all morning. And so he's packed up and he's already up the ramp a little bit. So as I mentioned earlier, the creek, the 10 Mile, is basically cut 15 or 20 feet into the limestone bedrock that all of North Texas sits on. What this means is it's very hard to actually get into the creek, except for a few points where that cliff face or that wall has actually collapsed on itself and basically allows for water to drain in. And it creates these banks. That's where we were. And so he's already up and he's into the tree line and on the other side of the tree line. I'm packing up and I just start going up and I get just inside the tree line when I hear a what sounds like an ugly crow. Like that's the only noise. That's the closest I can come to describing it. It's like the caw of an ugly crow,
Right.
and it was very loud. I was like, "What the heck is that?" I've never heard it before. So I sort of lean back and stick my head outside the tree line, and I see what I at first I think is the largest blue heron I've ever seen in my life. Right, wingspan again. The walls are sheer and they're about 15, 20 feet apart in most places. So I can actually see how big this thing is. Like it's not just out in the air. This thing is in the creek. So I can see how far the wings are from the walls.
Right.
And this is a big, big thing. And I'm like, 8 to 10 feet wingspan. I'm like, that's a big blue heron. I thought it was a blue heron for three reasons. One, it had that bluish gray coloring that they have, right? Sort of like a Payne's gray.
Right.
Two, it had sort of that S curve shape to its neck, right? When the cranes fly,
Hmm.
they move their head, so their head is basically sitting on their shoulders, and the neck sort of comes out underneath their bill a little bit. It's sort of how it had its neck, and I saw behind it what I thought were its legs, right? Because when a heron flies, it sticks both legs back out.
Right.
That's what I thought I was looking at, and it was overall it looks like a heron. And then and I'm watching it, and it gets literally. It isn't until it's right here in front of my face, and its right wingtip is 5 feet from my face. Like it's right there. And of course, it's a movie, so I can't see the fine detail, like it's like eye color or anything like that. But I can tell this thing has no feathers.
Hmm.
It's the wings are membranous. And what I thought, as it flies by, I also noticed that what I thought had been its legs sticking out behind it, like a heron, because that's what I was expecting to see, was actually a tail with a flange on the end of it.
Hmm.
And it just keeps on going. I'm in the straight. I'm like in the middle of the straightaway. Is the best way to think of where I'm at. Right? Is it? It's sort of the 10 Mile Creek. Let's face it. Texans are not good at naming things. It's like why is Round Rock called Round Rock? Because there was a big round rock that was sort of it told everyone you could cross there. Right?
Yeah.
Like why do we have Lake Texoma? Because it's a lake that's straddling the line between Texas and Oklahoma. We're
Hmm.
terrible at naming things. So 10 Mile Creek is a creek that runs for 10 miles and it empties into the Trinity. Well, it sort of snakes its way through Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, Wilmer Hutchins, and then meets up with the Trinity. So it sort of snakes its way through. But where I'm at is a good maybe 80 yards of straightaway.
Right.
So I get a good long look coming and then going. And once I realized that what I was looking at, once it was right in front of my face, I'm like, okay, I can, it's like you sort of have to take that moment to process what you're seeing. I could watch it fly away. And then that's when I realized I could see where its legs were in relation to the rest of its body. And that's why I'm like, this thing's a pterodactyl. Now, I'm 12. I'm into dinosaurs, but like everyone else, when you say pterodactyl or pterosaur, I'm thinking the pteranodons that you see in like the Flintstones or Jurassic Park, right?
Right.
Because they're big. that's the flashy one, right? They have the head crest and everything. This was only 8 to 10 feet, 8 to 10 foot wingspan. It was gray. It didn't have a crest. It had a tail. So I mean, the ramphoractoid pterodactyls are pterosaurs rather are not. They're just not they're not big. Like they weren't flashy at the time. So I was like, but that didn't seem like any of the ones that I was familiar with. But I'm reeling from this, and my friend comes back. It's at that moment my friend comes down and he's like, "Hey, you coming or not?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Did you just see the pterodactyl that flew through here?" And he laughs and he's like, "Dude, are you crazy?" And that's when I realized I can't talk to anybody about this. But I would go on to find it. It's like, okay, it's a ramphoractoid. And of course, over the years, I'd come across, there's that famous photo of it's a kid, right? Now, again, the problem is everyone seems to know that the photo comes from a book, but we can't find where the original newspaper the photo is supposed to have come from, right?
Okay.
But it's a kid holding a dead ramphoractoid pterodactyl, right, or pterosaur. It's not much bigger than he is. It has the long flange tail. I remember seeing it thinking, now that's weird. Why would someone fake this photo? Like normally when they're faked, it's the pterodactyl, right? And what's worse is usually when they're faked looking like, or the pteranodon rather, they're faked looking like what artists tend to think they looked like, right? So oftentimes you'll see them when they're faked, they'll have bat wings, right? So they'll have, the fingers in the membranes. Well, that's not what they look like, right? Or they'll have teeth. And it's like, that's just not what they really are. So I kept finding it odd that people would fake that one. Long story short, met Ken Gerhard, and I come to find out that, while I was aware that there were living or accounts of pterosaurs down in the, or in the Rio Grande Valley, I'm still thinking it's Dallas. They don't belong here.
Right.
Then I find out that there is a lot of people who've had sightings in southern Oklahoma, southern Oklahoma, North Texas region. Right. Of course, we also see them in Georgia, and we also see them in California. And so it was one of those things where I remember that first moment where I'm like, I'm not crazy, because they showed me a thing made, like a little statue made by someone who saw one up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
And it looked like a heron, and it did the S curve shape thing with the neck. And that's when I realized I could accept that I saw it, because I just couldn't believe it. And then I see this piece of artwork, and it's exactly what I saw. Like, it was missing the tail, but overall it looked like what I saw.
Right.
And in the years that have followed, everyone that I've spoken to literally has said this to me. They said, well, at first I thought I was looking at the biggest heron or crane, or I was looking at a pelican that was holding something. And then I got a closer look. So I think one of the things that allows these creatures to stay hidden, where, again, outside of the green space, the green wall, is they're nocturnal. But when they are seen during the day, I think most people are just, oh, it's a heron. Right. They write it off because they don't immediately stand out. You actually have to look at them. So again, I don't think that the whole sky is full of these things. I think there's probably, an endangered level population, right? But so what you have is a nocturnal animal that it has a very small population. So when we do see them during the day, they just also happen to look like cranes, like a blue heron. So most people don't ever recognize what they're seeing. That's how they stay hidden.
Right.
But that's what I saw. And over the years, I found many other people who've seen them, even in the same creek that I did, in or around. Even just a few months ago, I had someone call me up. It's like, Jason, this is going to sound crazy, but. And when I came out as a biblical paranormal researcher, two people I knew were like, okay, I'm going to tell you this. This is going to sound crazy, but. And I'm like, how is it that I've known you people for years and y'all never told me this?
Yeah. And
they're like, well, we didn't know if you'd say we were crazy. Well, no, I'm not, because I see the same thing, right?
Yeah. And and I think what it comes down to the most, like you just mentioned, a lot of people are just kind of afraid what everyone's going to think about them. So, people don't say, like, they don't relay, like their stories. Maybe they'd seen something out there as well, but they're just like, well, no one's going to believe me, so I'm just going to keep it to myself. I mean, besides myself and like maybe my brother and like a few other people, nobody else really gives a shit about, anything, like anything related. So it's just
Yeah.
like, I'm not gonna tell anybody. So I mean, I wonder how many stories out there that you have from other people that are just too afraid, to actually say anything because they just don't want anybody for anybody else to think that they're crazy. So
Honestly, so when I was doing research for the book, you know how I found people? I would just when I'd go out to investigate an area, I'd make multiple stops at like the gas station or
mm,
like like a Dollar Tree, buy a Coke or whatever. I'd say, and I'd talk to the guys behind the camera, like, "Hey, you ever seen anything weird?"
yeah.
Half of my stories came that way.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing: I didn't have to look that hard. And yet, you tell people I'm a biblical paranormal researcher. I'm looking for strange, and there is sometimes they'd be like, "Well, how strange you looking?"
Yeah.
Right now, here's the thing: everyone had a ghost story.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone has a ghost story. But again, the thing is, it didn't take long to find someone who'd had an encounter with an animal that most people wouldn't imagine existed. In fact, one guy, he didn't even necessarily know about old One Eye out in Lake Granbury.
Mm.
He was out. I tell his story, Mr. King, in the book. He didn't even realize there was Lake Monster out there, but he had an encounter with it. It was just weird. And in fact, when I told him that, he kind of stopped. He goes, "Well, okay, so this happened to me earlier in the year."
Yeah.
And but for him, he didn't think, he just thought it was weird. He didn't think it was necessarily a lake monster,
Right.
right? And so the thing is, a lot of people don't even necessarily put a lot of these things into that context. They just think it was weird, but okay, whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of this is just the fact that our culture doesn't want to talk about these creatures. Now, why we don't want to talk about that may be an entirely different conversation, but we don't. And it's been very unpopular to talk about this for a very long time. And we're just now coming to a point where people are feeling comfortable having these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I get a lot of stories, especially. So I have a lot of friends that are like, well, I was in the military, so I've been overseas and stuff like that, and I would
Mm-hmm.
get stories from like other countries and stuff like that. But um, it seems more like here in the States they're just not open to kind of speaking about it like
Mm-hmm.
more freely because like other countries I've been,
Oh, yeah.
like they have no issues and they actually believe more in like
Mm-hmm.
stories or that these things would actually exist somewhere. But it just seems like here in the States, all the people that I know and stuff like that, they don't really think about it too much or they don't really care. So it's kind of weird that way. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's weird. I think there's an agenda behind it, personally. It's one of those things where, um, again, this may be another conversation for another day.
Mm.
But around World War One, like if you go before World War One, you can find even mainstream academics talking about weird things. Like you can
Right.
find archaeology. I guess the closest thing archaeologists they had at the time, they would talk about giants in the United States. They would talk
Mm.
about some of these myths. The idea of finding living creatures that supposedly had been extinct, it wasn't outrageous to them.
Right.
But then around World War One and later, that's all off the table. And what we have is, in fact, we can find a lot of stories in the late 1800s that oftentimes a lot of researchers now just say, "Oh, they're nothing," right? It's just back then news reporters they would make things up. Yeah, no, they didn't.
Yeah.
Now, do they get the facts right? Guess what? Y'all aren't getting the facts right today anyway, so bite me on that one. It's But they weren't making them up. They were relating real accounts.
Yeah.
And the simple fact of the matter is they were open to doing it, but at some point around World War One, I think for political reasons, there was this move away from anything that was outside of this sort of very uh, it's not just atheistic, it's an atheistic perspective of the world, but it's very predicated on Darwinism,
Mm.
and not even Darwinism, a very specific understanding of Darwinism, right?
Right.
This sort of I think it was this sort of very aggressive form of Darwinian atheism, where it's like, this is the model, this is how it has to be. Nothing can vary from this.
Right.
So anything that sort of ran across that was thrown out as superstition. It was sort of like, instead of saying, hey, let's just bring science into these encounters and say, people are seeing things, let's start asking some questions and exploring it. It had to be kicked out of the question entirely.
Right.
Because we were told by science that these things don't exist anymore, therefore you couldn't see them.
Yeah.
And it's a very narrow perspective of the world, and that's what's led to where we are today. The thing is, people are now willing to come forward and talk about it, because now you're no longer the one guy who's seen them and everyone else is staying silent. You're one of a lot of people who've seen them.
Yeah.
And so once people can see that other people have come forward, they're more likely to come forward and tell you their story. But this is, I would argue, our reticence in our culture to discuss these things is very much an agenda.
Yeah. Especially, yeah. I mean, agenda driven. Absolutely. I mean, you had the Smithsonian. I don't remember, it was sometime recently or earlier this year,
Mm-hmm.
admitting that they were actually had actually taken giant bones, way back in the day, and actually disposed of them. Now, I don't remember exactly where I read that story, but I know that it was, I want to say sometime at the beginning of this year, that they had actually said that they were, actually going out and looking for giants, and
Mm-hmm.
like all their bones, and then actually getting rid of them, so that there was like no evidence of them left.
Right. Well,
So yeah.
they didn't. I remember the story. The thing is, they didn't exactly say it that way. It's one of those things where they put a face on it, and so people are like, well, okay, there's a reasonable thing. It's like, this wasn't really what it was. It's sort of their way of it. And the thing is, again, they're very much involved in this cover up. And the thing is, though, a lot of the actual covering up happened years ago.
Right.
So it's sort of like everyone who's handed down, they're like, well, they're like, well, of course, there's no evidence of this, so why bother?
Yeah.
They were just disposing of frauds, and they were disposing of fakes, or things like that, like they in misidentified material. So they created a story. That story then becomes the accepted narrative, and so long as, well, we can't produce anything to counter that narrative anymore, because you already destroyed it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's real easy to say, well, you can't show me any evidence, therefore you're wrong, when you've knowingly destroyed all the evidence.
Yeah.
Well, now we're 3 generations from that, and so they can safely say, well, we have no evidence of this, so we're just going to go with this. It was just them getting rid of trash. Why would a good scientist, and this is, they have this idea, why would a good scientist destroy unknown information? Wouldn't everyone want to make their career off of it?
Yeah.
Well, if they were good scientists, yes. I think that's sort of the crux of this whole thing, is maybe the people who were doing it weren't good scientists.
Mm.
It goes back to the whole question of the agenda. But again, it goes back to, we're very slowly changing the paradigm in which we all live,
Right.
which is allowing people to ask these questions, and maybe eventually we'll come up with something.
Yeah, it's definitely upsetting that they want to continue to hide, whatever they find out there. I mean, I guess they feel that maybe on one hand we're not ready for it and stuff like that. You can make an argument. A lot of people are pretty crazy out there, and if you let them know that, some of these things out there actually existed out there, I mean, who knows? A lot of people would lose faith, or they would come,
Mm-hmm.
just stuff like that. But I still don't think it's an excuse to actually cover it up to the extent that they do. With things like UFOs and stuff like that. But
Well, so I'll be honest, I don't know that's even that complicated. I think for most people, right, in the field,
yeah,
and this is actually one of the reasons I stopped I finished my bachelor's and I didn't go on in archaeology, because originally what I wanted to do was combine my art history studies with archaeology,
mm,
because I believe, and I still believe, that I think a lot of artwork is very much misunderstood, because the people who are studying it, they don't actually, like, they're coming at it from the wrong perspective. They're not looking at it from an artistic perspective.
right,
So they're not really interpreting a lot of these materials correctly. But what happens is, you get out in the field, right? and then you find the wrong thing, and you realize, man, this is going to catch, again, it's sort of like, it's the whole, pterodactyl. It's like, this is going to catch a lot of flack. I don't know that I really want to get down for this. I ain't going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because you know what you call an archaeologist who finds the wrong object? Florist.
Okay.
Because your funding is dependent on, again, basically the mainstream. So this is how it works. The mainstream academia says this guy or this woman is good. They're profound. They're writing papers. They're in good standing. You can give them money. A lot of this money comes from the government or comes from government adjacent individuals. So you have to get that grant money. You got to produce. You got to find the new thing. You don't want to upset the apple cart. Like, there's some things you can absolutely do. Right? The new discoveries made all the time, but none of these discoveries are making it's like, oh, hey, I found. In fact, there's a woman. This is a great example. Found in northern Mexico. It was stone work. It was stone tools and some other objects. And when they had them tested, I forget the type of testing they had, but it basically came up to over 50,000 years. And the thing is, there weren't supposed to be humans capable of producing such complicated materials that far back.
Right.
Now, again, I don't think it was actually that long ago, but that's a different kettle of fish. The thing is, she puts the information out. She shut down. She was on her way to to basically having tenure, and they kicked her out of the whole university. And one of the people who worked with her said, look, I agree with everything that you're saying. Right. I've seen the evidence. I did the test myself. You're right. Everything you're saying is right. But if I say that, I'm going to get kicked out. So I have to officially say, because my department chair is telling me I can't agree with this publicly. It is not very hard. You don't have to dig very hard to find people who used to be archaeologists and now they're florists or there's something else, because they found the wrong object. There are a lot of laboratories who are given Bigfoot hairs, right? And they're like, well, the problem is they tell them it's Bigfoot, and then it's like, we don't know. Or it becomes a bear. Or it's, hey, this is really interesting. What do you think it is? Where did it come from? Well, we think it's a Bigfoot hair. I'm sorry, you can't tell anyone that we did this test. Yeah. Right? And so it catches you in that loop. You have someone who's willing to say, hey, this hair is exotic. We can't identify it. But they won't come on the record to say that because now because they don't want to be associated with it. So there's an active suppression. And so it leads to Sasquatch being in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and no one talking about it. Living pterosaurs. Yeah. And then, of course, don't even get started on the paranormal stuff. Like I have stories in the books of people actually physically seeing goatmen. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, but it's not just, oh, I heard it. It's like, no, I talked to the people, or I talked to the person who took the actual report. Right. And it's like people are seeing actual physical creatures. Again, I mentioned the woman who was attacked by the lechuza. Physical lechuza, and we know it was physical because it actually bent the tree branch it was on. They heard it tapping on the window after they escaped from it. Now, clearly, it's a paranormal. This is clearly a paranormal entity, right? But it did take some kind of physical form. So, in same thing, whether it's goatmen or lechuza or some of these other creatures that I don't even really have names for, I sort of associate them with the goatmen or chupacabras. You sort of have to say, hey, something's going on. Not all these you can't have all these people having the same hallucination, right? Yeah. There is a paranormal aspect to a lot of this, and the problem is people don't talk about it. It's unscientific, it's superstitious, so we never really explore it. Right. And I think it's coming to that time where people are going to be more comfortable talking about it. We can really start exploring and asking some really big questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about time. I mean, you mentioned the Goatman in Fort Worth. I mean, that in and of itself is kind of odd. I spent a lot of time in Fort Worth. I mean, can you kind of go into what that whole thing was about? Like how what that story was?
So So and this is actually kind of, I very much start the book with it, because in many ways this event has so many ramifications for us in the who are interested in the cryptozoology,
Right.
because this is the second big takeaway, right? We oftentimes look at lore with creatures, and we work from what the reports are in this lore, and we put it all together as like, okay, so we're looking at this or this. And let me explain why that's why the Fort Worth Goatman is sort of evidence as to why we shouldn't do that. In the 60s, early 60s, in fact, I think it was 1963. I'm terrible with names and dates, so
That's right.
forgive me for that. But the Lake Worth monster, right? It was a famous event. What we had was basically a Sasquatch. And my theory, and I talk about this in the book, because I think he actually had mange. This is, people talk about having scales or being a burn victim. There's several reports of that.
Hmm.
I think it was just, it had mange. And again, I go into the details as to why in the book. But we have a Sasquatch that is seen by dozens of people, including police officers,
Right.
in broad daylight. It actually throws debris and a tire at people.
Hmm.
It is within feet of people. It gets on one gentleman's car. Like this creature, this is not a subtle event. It's a big event, and it is seen by numerous people. And the thing is, it makes the television. And again, 1963, television's new. Everyone was talking about this.
Right.
Well, Jim Mars, the newspaperman, who was sort of taking these stories, he dubs it the Goat Man, because the first gentleman who sees it, he saw it as having scales and sort of goat-like hair, so he called it the Goat Man.
Right.
Well, so the name sticks. And what happens, and I show in the book from recorded events in Cedar Hill, that what happens is there had been prior encounters with Sasquatch for going back over a century in the area. Waxahachie, Red Oak, didn't matter. They were called the creature, it was called the monster, whatever. But it was known to go up and down the creeks and use them as a highway.
Right.
People knew about it, but once the Lake Worth monster event happens, they're all now relabeled as Goatmen.
Hmm.
And if people have an encounter with one, it becomes the Goatman.
Right.
Well, so then this is where it gets weird. The name then sticks and becomes its own separate mythology. And what you see is all of the Goatmen in and around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and there's a ton of them.
Hmm.
There is lore, even the White Rock Lake, which we're going to put, so the White Rock Lake Goatman's put aside for a second, but even it falls prey to this, where the events of the Lake Worth monster in the summer of 1963, I believe, it is those events that become the lore that gets placed on top of all these Goatmen, right? So that's there. But then what happens is the name Goatman becomes the urban legend mythological name
Okay.
for all the things that are seen. Let's use Old Alton Bridge, which is also known as Goatman Bridge. It's out there in Denton, right? It's very famous. People go out there all the time to look at it. Ghost hunters love it. It is, you actually stop and you listen to the story. It's not a Sasquatch, right? What you have with the story there is it's a hangman's bridge, which is an old story that you can find virtually every iron truss bridge in the South has the story of the hangman's bridge, right? The original version is there's a criminal who's done something wrong. They hang the guy. His head falls off, right? Or he's died and his spirit haunts it, right? It's Hangman's Bridge. But the old Alton version, the first version he's a criminal. Second version he is who gets decapitated, and then he finds some poor goat, wrenches its head on, places it on the body, and then that's what haunts the area, right? That's the original version.
Right.
In the 60s, it's updated to be a poor black man who's dubbed the Goat Man because he had a little goat farm, and that the Ku Klux Klan comes and murders his family and then lynches him on the side of the bridge. The end result is the same, but
Right.
how you get there, again, that's more indicative of our changing society. I talk about that as well.
Right.
But the name Goatman is the important thing. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that location originally would have been a really great place to have seen a Sasquatch. But again, and that may, again, I think like in Cedar Hill, people saw one, the name sticks. Well, then that urban legend, it takes its own sort of urban legend name and it moves on with it, right?
Hmm.
And so what we have is the original Goatman, which is a Sasquatch out at Lake Worth. It's a real physical creature. We then have the mythological Goatman, which is which is basically the urban legends all building on top of it. DeSoto has the Hinky Man, which is their version, but most other places have Goatmen. But then you get to White Rock Lake, and again, the same lore is on top of it, right? It's all the stuff from the Lake Worth event. This creature will throw trash at you, it throws tires at people, and you're like, hold on, same thing, right? You can see how people are just telling the story. So this is the danger of lore. We often, I think, we're using lore to understand these creatures. The problem is that's very unreliable for a lot of reasons. But this is where like the White Rock Lake Goatman gets weird. People actually see a Goatman, a clearly paranormal creature, but it's half man, half goat. The famous story, Nick Redfern actually made this one famous when he lived out there, the story of Sandy Grace, where this creature walks out from behind the tree line, 7 feet tall, goat legs, human body, horns, smiling like the Joker, walks up to her, and when it gets like 15 feet, like she's panicking, she's freaking out, it then disappears in a blinding flash of light. Well, okay, we have to, it's like, it would be easy to say, well, maybe it was just her, except I have more people, I have an entire crowd of people in the book who see almost the same thing. Right. And it happens before Sandy Grace. So Sandy Grace's story couldn't have inspired theirs because they saw it and they didn't tell anybody about it. Because again, they didn't want to be seen as crazy. And then I have other stories. You get a little away from White Rock Lake, like no more than 2 miles. There are creeks and tributaries off of, because for most people who don't know, North Texas doesn't have natural lakes. They're all aspects of the Trinity River, right? You have 4 primary creeks, and you have these other smaller creeks. And what we've done is we've dammed them up. And so we have, so these lakes are all man-made off of these tributaries of the Trinity. Well, there are these little creeks and tributaries from White Rock Lake. I've got 2 different accounts of creatures that aren't quite Goatman, but they're clearly paranormal, and they're not, it's like we don't know what they are. They have backwards facing legs. They're about the same height. There's a story I didn't get, unfortunately I found out about it after I'd already written the book, that describes a smiling monster sneaking into someone's home, and it's less than a mile from White Rock Lake. So the question becomes now, you have to ask is, well, why are we seeing a Goatman? Yeah. Did our story, in our telling of the story, did we create this creature? Or is it simply is it a creature that existed and is now taking a form that we would recognize? Or is there something deeper? Like, again, if you take a lot of these, and we talk about this on my other channel, on the channel I'm on Mondays, and we've caught some flack for it, but a lot of people have actually started asking, they sort of appreciate us asking the question. Do we even really know what we should attribute to Bigfoot or not? So it's sort of let's take this step a little bit further. What if there are other creatures out there? The problem is, paranormal creatures, other physical creatures, but we lump everything into Sasquatch or everything into Bigfoot, right?
Right.
Well, what if that's the problem? And what if this paranormal creature that Sandy Grace and this other people saw, if it's capable of changing its form, how often are what we call Bigfoot not actually Bigfoot? What if there are these other paranormal creatures running around, but maybe they look like Bigfoot, or they're taking the form of Bigfoot to hide, or that's the form that we would process them in? And so what we have are these stories in this lore, these urban legends that we're taking as Bigfoot, we're putting them in the mythos. And so this is why we can't come to the understanding of what they are, is because we've got bad data in there. So again, the 2 major takeaways for those of you who are really interested in sort of this question of cryptozoology is the green wall, and then the danger of mythology and of lore. and how we need to start parsing things. Because one of the questions I ask in the book is, let's remove the name Goatman and Lechusa, right? What are we left with? Well, with the Goatmen of White Rock Lake and the areas, what we're kind of found with what we see, once you remove the word Goatman, what we're left with are the same creatures people said they saw in ancient Greece, right? The fauns and Pan and the satyrs. They're the Leshy of Russian lore. They're the Shadim of Hebraic of Hebraic lore and biblical writings. Same thing with Lechusa. It's like, okay, well, remove the name, this Hispanic name to it. What are you left with? You're left with the Harpies of the Greeks. You're left with Lilith of the Sumerians and the Hebrew. It's like, well, hold on. These are the same creatures. We've seen these things before. These are not new things. They're old things. We've just given them new names.
Yep.
So the question is, are we just telling the same stories over and over again, and we're seeing them like tulpas, like Nick Redfern talks about, or are these creatures real? They're paranormal, but they're real, and they just take different names as we encounter them in different cultures.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for you, but if you want to go buy 12 copies of the books, right, I'm certain it'll help you figure it out.
Absolutely. No, but you know what? It's weird that you mentioned White Rock Lake, because I used to live actually right by White Rock Lake.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's just, but it's you could see how things would exist out there because it's just like all surrounded by trees and like marsh, and it's just you get lost in there really if you were just to go out there at night. We would always drive by and I would see people biking through there and stuff, and I was always thinking, like, why would you go biking through there at night?
Exactly.
At night, it's like, why would you do that? But it's crazy that they would see those kinds of things out there, like. And I used to live like right by there as well. But I mean, it's even more interesting that you mentioned that maybe it's kind of one of these things that people would will into existence, maybe along the lines of like this whole Slender Man thing, right? It was like something born online, and then all of a sudden people were seeing it like out in the world, and maybe it changed, stuff like that. That's definitely interesting. Yeah.
Well, so I hate I hate referencing movies as a point, but I think it was a good one. Did you ever see the what was supposed to be the last Nightmare on Elm Street? I think it was literally called The Last Nightmare. Okay, where it's like a movie within a movie, and the entire premise was, I thought it was a brilliant idea, was that the reason we keep telling horror stories was to trap this demon, and that as long as we were telling the stories, the demon was trapped within the story. And basically humanity was safe. But once we stop telling the stories, it breaks free and comes into our world. Of course, the climax of the film, I'm sorry to spoil a 35-year-old movie now. God, I'm getting old. But the end result of it is when they kill it, they find out, hey, this thing was the witch from Hansel and Gretel. And you see all these weird, it's the serpent. It's this demon that's been around forever. So the question becomes, what if, again, it's a like you said, like we have the Tulpa theory that Nick Redfern prefers, where it's our thoughts are manifesting these creatures, right? But what if this is something, again, what if they're just old? What if these paranormal creatures they're real, actual demons, but that either our telling of their story gives them authority or life, or allows them to come over, right? Or maybe the reason we keep telling the same stories is because that's just what they look like, right? And so it's like, well, what'd you see? I saw a goat man. Why? Because that's what it really looks like. It's like, that's just what it is. It's a freaking goat man, and that's the form it takes. And so we just, it's a chicken or the egg question, but it's a question we need to really ask if we want to get anywhere with this question, right? It's like we're dealing with, and this is just even assuming that Bigfoot really is just an ape or an ancient hominid, right? I mean, like, we don't know what it is.
Right.
I'm happy saying I don't know. Don't get me wrong. I would like for it to be an ape. Like, it would make me feel way better than to think that there is some telepathic, humanoid that can interdimensional humanoid running around. It's like, okay, I don't see that being the case.
Hmm.
But I've talked to people who are, people who legitimately, you're like, okay, these are good people. They're not lying. They're not crazy, but they will talk about a telepathic Bigfoot.
Right.
Now, my immediate thought though is, okay, what if the problem is it's not really Bigfoot? So let's say there is, Patty was, of Patterson Gimlin fame, was an example of what a Sasquatch is. Just a relic bipedal ape, right? That's all it is. It's probably smart because it's big, has a lot of brain power, no problem. I mean, most apes are really, really smart anyway. So there's nothing that bothers me about that. So Sasquatch is this. But then you have the other stories that are being attributed to Sasquatch of them being telepathic and moving through walls. And I'm like, well, let's remove the Bigfoot nomenclature for just a moment. What is it that you're seeing? Because then it's like, well, what are people actually encountering? Well, in many cases, it does sort of connect to things like UFOs and demons and these other paranormal creatures. It's like, so maybe there is actual Bigfoot, which is some sort of an ape,
Right.
or whatever. Like, I don't know. But then we have mythological Bigfoot. But then we have paranormal Bigfoot. And this paranormal Bigfoot isn't the same thing as this. It's something else. But we keep calling it Bigfoot. And so we keep trying. So we're having this fight over what something is. And it's like, hold up, these are two different phenomena. Right? Like, you imagine someone who wants to talk about sharks, and you got other people who want to talk about dolphins, but they're arguing because they're talking about two completely different things, and yet they're saying they're trying to make them the same creature. We'd look at them like they were crazy.
Right.
What if that's what's happening with Bigfoot? There is a material Bigfoot. It eats, it defecates, and procreates. But then we have something else. The things that we see around White Rock Lake, these other paranormal creatures. The problem is we start, because of lore, because of assumptions, we pile everything into one big box, and we're trying to figure it out. Well, guess what? If you take two different puzzles and you throw them together, you're never going to solve it.
Yeah.
You have to sort through what pieces are actually to belong to which puzzle, and then you can solve separate puzzles.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, there's definitely a whole lot of stuff going on. I mean, whether it's kind of one of those things where people just kind of pin it all on Bigfoot because it's just like the stories they hear over and over again, and that's just like the first thing that comes to their mind. I would say that's more of what's happening. Like quite often, I mean, people don't know what to call it, or like they don't know what they're looking at, and it's just the first thing that comes to their mind is like, man, I had that story about Bigfoot, and then hey, must have been a Bigfoot that I saw out there, and that's just it. And so it never goes past that. I mean, because everyone's just like, oh, well, I seen a Bigfoot, and they tell somebody else, and that person's like, man, you're crazy. So that's just where it ends. That's just never goes anywhere else. So it's like, yeah, I mean, who knows?
It's the name everyone uses, right? It's sort of the name. Like, I think the Chupacabra is a great example of this, right? It's because it happened sort of in real time for us. Before the mid 1990s, no one had ever heard of the Chupacabra.
Yeah.
Right? It shows up in the original version. It's sort of like this weird alien-looking lizard thing with spikes.
Yeah.
But then eventually we have the sort of this weird kangaroo thing. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes something, and we have like 3 or 4 different, you go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, the Chupacabra is 3 or 4 different creatures.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons people are like, so you believe in the Chupacabra? I'm like, no, I don't believe in the Chupacabra, because if it was a real thing, we'd see all the same thing, like with Bigfoot. And I would explain that. Like with Bigfoot, it doesn't matter where you go. They may be different sizes, but they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
But with Chupacabras, it's like, I'm sorry, you have 3 or 4 major things. These are all radically different. Well, then again, you get a little bit further and we have the koi dogs. And people are saying, yeah, that's the Chupacabra. Mm-hmm. Well, hold on. Yeah. That thing's not draining blood from your chickens. It's a dog. Now, it's a weird dog, right? It really is. There is some, it's something we really need to explore. But then it's sort of, that's when you realize, hold on. The problem is the word Chupacabra became the nomenclature. And so the problem is you had the phenomena, which is your dead chicken that's been drained, a la Dracula. And then, so that's the name, and that's where the name chupacabra comes from. But then it becomes popularized, and now the chupacabra is everything weird that you see. And that's why we had at one point 3 or 4 major versions of the chupacabra. Well, again, these blue koi dogs that we're finding, they don't have spikes,
Yeah.
but I think they're the origin of the kangaroo. Look, you could see how someone could look at that and say it was kangaroo. But it's like, well, where did the spikes come from? Well, the spikes came from the original story, because the original story had a creature with spikes. And so again, it's the lore. So people, and this is the thing we often miss. I don't really talk about this in the book at all, but this is something I like to talk about as an artist. Most people who are drawing, whether it's a dragon from 1,000 years ago, the Jersey Devil from 100 years ago, or the chupacabra of today, the artists drawing these things never saw it. They are literally working off of what someone has told them that they've seen. And then but then they would also throw in what they've heard, right? So the original version is this alien creature with spikes, which Ken Gerhart and Nick Redfern have actually pointed back to being sort of, again, like the whole Jim Mars thing with the Goatman, right? The original newspaper man in Puerto Rico who sort of creates the chupacabra name and phenomena. The woman who saw it had likened the creature to Syl from the movie Species, which was out at the time.
Mm.
You know, it had literally just come out, and there were posters of Syl in Puerto Rico. She looked at the creature and she likened it to that. So the artists and everyone, so what they're doing is they're actually, unfortunately, using Geiger's artwork. H.R. Geiger, the famous artist who created the Alien from Aliens.
Mm.
And that's, you'll need to have me on to talk about that. There's an interesting cryptozoological connection between H.R. Geiger and the alien xenomorphs. But he creates Syl, which has the spikes and the big red eyes, and she describes the creature looking like that. Well, the problem is, because she said it looked so like the alien, like from the Species movie, we get all these images thrown on top of it.
Right.
So even what she saw doesn't look like what we think a chupacabra is supposed to look like. It's just the newspaper man associated it to. Now the imagery is connected. So people hear chupacabra. They're like, well, what did the chupacabra look like? Well, it looked like a kangaroo. Okay, but then they go and they hear this. So that's the blue koi dog. But then the artist goes and draws it. Well, what does it look? She said it kind of looked like a weird kangaroo. And then he looks it up. It's like, well, this guy over here says it has spikes and big red eyes, and so the artist draws all that together.
Yeah.
And now we have this other weird thing. Look at the Jersey Devil. The artist who drew it wasn't even in the city. They saw it in Jersey. The artist was in Philadelphia, right? So what does he do? He takes these accounts that people of what they saw, and he draws them literally. He wasn't a forensic artist. He wasn't saying, okay, so what is this person really telling me? When most people are telling you something, particularly if they're not trained observers,
Right.
they're going to try and connect it to something that they already know. So what are they describing? It was a big creature. It had a weird, they said it had like the head of a deer, and it had bat-like wings, and it had a long bifurcated tail. So that's why they drew it that way. It looked like a deer with bat wings and a weird-looking devil tail. That's what he drew, because he took it literally.
Yeah.
He probably also wasn't necessarily taking it seriously either. But let's re-examine that description, right? Okay, it's a big thing. It has, what does bat-like wing means? Which means it's membranous and it's not a bird's wing.
Hmm.
It has a weird deer-like face. Does it mean it was actually a deer? No. What they're saying is it wasn't a billed beak, right? It didn't have a beak. It wasn't a bird face. And the closest thing they could think of was something like a deer. Okay, so what that means is long and slender. No apparent, no beak, okay, cool. And has a bifurcated tail. What's that? Well, that's the devil's tail.
Right.
So it means it's a long tail with a flange on the end. Well, what the heck did I just describe? I described a rhamphorhactoid pterodactyl. They've been here. They always have. The guys who were drawing the dragons of 1,000 years ago were just doing what the guy told them. So what did it look like? Well, I didn't actually see it, but my friend did, and he said it had like the legs of a chicken. And it had, but in the front, look at the Babylonian gates, right? Or the Ishtar gates. The dragon that's on there has like bird's feet for the hind legs. The front legs are like a lion, and it has a long snake-like. Well, okay, but it has a long tail. Great. How would you describe something like, say, an allosaur, or even like an iguanodon, to someone who lived 3,000 years ago? They leave three-toed tracks like a bird, right? Their front paws, though they're not birds per se, they've got long talons on them. Even the iguanodon is more of it's got those spikes on them.
Right.
It has it's like a long neck, and it has a sort of snake-like head. That's what they're doing. They're just translating it the best way that they from what they're hearing. Let's look at something as bizarre as the cockatrix, right? You go throughout history, and there's these weird stories of the cockatrix, which is a dragon that has the upper torso of a chicken. Sounds completely preposterous, right?
Yeah.
It really does. And,
Yeah.
by the way, just as an aside, this is one of those little pet peeves of mine. People talk about the cockatrix and basilisk and satyrs found in the Bible. Those are mistranslations of real creatures, right? Like a cobra.
Right.
But mythologically, there are cockatrix, which are, again, dragons with the heads and upper torsos of chickens. Sounds completely ridiculous. Great. But let's say you lived 2,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago. How would you describe something like, say, an oviraptor? We now know that theropods had feathers.
Right.
But they probably weren't, so literally, what were they looking at? The oviraptor has a beak, right? And even it has a crest.
Right.
And if they had feathers, I mean, how else would you describe it? It's this 6 foot tall dragon that looks like a chicken. Like it's a perfect explanation. And the thing is, we didn't know that these creatures had feathers.
Yeah.
Until like the last 20, 30 years. So hold up, we now sort of have to ask questions. What are we doing with people who were living only 2,000 years ago, or 150 years ago, or 500 years ago, telling us stories about creatures that are one-to-one parallels with creatures that we find in the fossil record? And not only are they one-to-one, they have features they couldn't possibly know that they had, like feathers. It doesn't make sense unless they were alive and people saw them. That's what cryptozoology is. They're simply remnants of a time that we consider, they're animals that are in time and place that we don't consider them native to, and that are strange and bizarre, whether it's a Bigfoot or a living pterosaur. And then you have the supernatural paranormal creatures that are just non-material. They're alien to our universe, and so we find them as very, very strange. But and up until very recently, people were okay with their existence.
Right.
No one questioned it up until really the age of reason. And even then, most people were willing to accept them. But post World War I, maybe a little bit before that as well, it became unfashionable to even ask the question about them, because there was an agenda that said this is how the world is, and anything that doesn't fit within this box has to be shunned. And that's where we are.
It's definitely odd, especially during those times. I mean, you would hear stories about creatures being seen like in the middle of wars and stuff, right? And like especially like recently, like in Afghanistan and things like that, when I was overseas and stuff, you would hear stories of like not only giants but like other creatures that you would see like in the mountains or in the desert or just wherever. And you would just hear some crazy stories, and just just to think that after that time, people were just like, well, I mean, we're not going to talk about it anymore because it's kind of crazy. But I mean, and that seems to be when the world's kind of in some like serious turmoil, is kind of when you would see more action out of them. Like a lot of people would just see some crazy things out there, like I mentioned during war and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's odd. I mean, like you mentioned demons as well, and I know you had demons here in Dallas. What was that one all about? Can you
let's again, the GOATMEN, right, out in White Rock Lake. Like, what do you think that is? It's But then you have things like the Lechusa that attacked the young woman that I talked about in the book.
Right.
Her aunt was a Curandara, right? Uh, for those who don't know who that is, it's basically a Latin American shaman, female, but it's more born out of the syncretic religions like Santeria.
Right.
So it's not just a shaman; it's a little bit more than that. But so she believes that she was targeted because of her connection to her aunt. But that's clearly a paranormal creature because at one point this thing's haunting her for like 5 days. She hears it while she's in a movie theater at one point. No one else hears it, but she can hear it. And it's tapping on the glass of her house at night. The thing, for those people who don't know what a Lechusa is, it's basically imagine an owl the size of a human being with the face of a woman. Well, that's a harpy of Greek mythology, right? And like you were telling me about the giant owl that your father and his friends caught, that it was a woman in the morning. That's a witch. It's like these are all the same stories, right? For the Greeks, that's what they were. The harpies were controlled by a witch. So it's all the same story because I think we're encountering the same creatures. So it's just some are paranormal, some are purely physical, but we're definitely encountering the same things just over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty, I mean, so like growing up in the desert, like out in El Paso, right? So you kind of see more, I guess, stories of like witches and ghosts, things like that, especially coming from like like over there, all the people coming from Mexico. So like we would have a lot of stories. I literally went to school like on the border. I like lived on the border. I'd walk out of my front door and you can look across. You're looking into Mexico. So I was like right there. So we used to go to school there, and we would have a lot of people that would come from Mexico every day to go to school here. And so they would come and they would tell us stories about like witches and flying witches in Mexico and witches and spells and all kinds of crazy things. My grandparents were from Mexico and stuff like that. So you would hear crazy stories about like demons and all kinds of ghosts and witches and all kinds of weird things that would happen out there. And it's definitely all over. It's definitely not, you wouldn't be surprised if you spoke to some kind of Hispanic family predominantly, and they would have some kind of story of like witches and,
oh yeah. I've I've got a few stories. Let me tell you. My mother actually grew up in Del Rio, so I mean,
okay,
kind of the same thing. So, but yeah, believe me when I say I know I've got some stories. But so here's the thing, right? When it comes to the paranormal, I think this intertwines sort of very well with with sort of the whole question of White Rock Lake. I think that there is definitely a one-to-one parallel between a culture's acceptance of the paranormal and the paranormal's appearance, right? Now, there's obviously two questions here. The question is does believing it make you open to it, or is it choosing when to appear? Meaning, let's take a look at C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, right? There's a scene where he's talking, where the titular demon is talking about what this theoretical human that he would call a materialist witch, because he's talking about how with witches, the beauty of a witch was that the demons could terrorize and inflict pain upon the witch directly, right? But with a materialist, so they said a materialist, you couldn't do that. They said, but a materialist was one of their favorite things to make humans, because they would never think about God,
right?
Because if there's just the physical, then you're never going to think about God. Right. They said the problem with witches is while they're a lot of fun, they also at some point it's very easy for them to start thinking about God, because, well, if there's this, there must be the other, right? It's sort of so, but then he speculates that there could be a materialist witch, which is something that could believe in the paranormal without actually believing in the paranormal. It'd still be material to him. That's sort of where the concept stops. And so for him, the question was, is it possible? So it's like, maybe the question is that the demons necessarily aren't more prevalent in one culture than they are the other, but rather the tactics that they're going to take are different depending on the culture's acceptance of it, right? If it's like, if you accept that magic exists and the paranormal exists, why bother hiding?
Right.
Why not do what you want to do directly? And to a point, it also helps to suppress the culture, because it's like, well, the whole point of a lot of these of demonic activity in my experience is that they're trying to keep someone oppressed, right? They enjoy it, and sort of out of fear, a lot of people won't necessarily turn to God.
Right.
But materialists, they're never going to think about it, which is where I find it very interesting that the UFO phenomena, which I don't really go too much in the book, and I don't know if that's really what your things about, we can talk about it later, but I find it very interesting that it was Aleister Crowley himself, the 20th century's most famous and diabolical occultist, who said, today we call them angels and demons. Tomorrow we'll call them something else.
Hmm.
And the same people who practice, the teachings of Aleister Crowley, they'll tell you that the demon lamb that he conjured, that taught him his magics, they still communicate with them today, but that's not a singular demon. It's actually a species of telepathic alien that they're communicating with. And it's like, huh, that's interesting,
Yeah.
right? And of course, what's happened over the last 30, 40 years, as we've become more used to and comfortable talking about aliens, we've seen more UFOs. And again, what's funny is, if you talk to most ancient alien theorists, they'll tell you the angels and demons of the Bible, of ancient mythology, they are the same creatures of today. So it's like, you were to put me, I'm again biblical paranormal researcher, I'm going to tell you, no, they're just straight up demons.
Right.
The ancient astronaut theoretician would say, no, they're aliens. But the thing is, we're saying they're the same creature. It's just, the question is, which perspective do you want to put on them? Perhaps the paranormal is the same way. It's always there, but your culture's ability to perceive it, it depends on what they're doing. Is they're making a choice. They would rather have you, fat, happy, and stupid,
Hmm.
because as long as you're going a certain direction, they why bother to intervene when you can be more subtle? But but if they're willing to accept that we exist, why not have a party and start tormenting people, possessing people? And it's like, well, hey, if we can convince some woman that she can become a giant owl creature and kill her enemies, maybe that's what we do, and maybe
Yeah.
that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's one of those things where maybe this is a lot more complicated than we think it is, but it's as simple as, these creatures have an agenda. In the same way that whoever is suppressing the cryptozoology had an agenda 100 years ago,
Right.
perhaps these paranormal creatures have an agenda as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always been interested in the fact, or in the idea of who would be harassed more, or even, I guess, um, you know, people that are believe like in religion, and like they believe in God, and things like that. Would they be more at risk of being attacked, or would people that do not believe in anything, they don't believe in any kind of God, they have no
Mm-hmm.
spirituality? I mean, like, on one hand, would it be the person that doesn't believe in anything, would they be attacked more, or the fact that those people who actually believe in God, and they're, they go to
Mm-hmm.
church or mass, things like that, they're more attacked because of the fact that, they actually believe in God, that they would
Right.
be probably like the biggest target out of all of them. And it's always been like just one of those interesting things that I'd always thought about. I've spoken to a lot of people with, and it's kind of, I guess, 50-50 when we actually come down to it. Cause I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's no real, like, I guess, stats or any kind of proof that would hold
Right.
one over the other, right? So it's just kind of like, would the atheist be attacked more because they don't believe in anything, or would the person who believes in God be attacked more because they believe in God and the devil
Mm-hmm.
wants to bring them down, right?
Right.
So I guess it would just kind of depend. That's just one
Mm-hmm.
of those things I've always
Well,
thought about.
I've often thought that, well, again, my experience is, I think they attack people differently,
Right.
right? Um, I've talked to a lot of my police friends. I started asking them a question many years ago, and it's really borne a lot of fruit and stuff I wish I could forget from time to time. But I asked them, how often do you arrest someone who's done something really bad? I mean, genuinely heinous. And they'll tell you, I don't know what came over me. I don't even feel like it was me doing it. I felt like I was out of my body watching it happen. Like, how often does that happen? Every single one. Two men have said it happens all the time. Again, I think that a lot of what's going on is the nature of the attacks are different. Because every time I've talked to a ton of people who were atheists, like, I didn't believe in the supernatural, but then they got put into a situation where the supernatural occurred, and their first reaction is, I'm going to church, right? Because it's one of those things where it's like they put themselves in because they were playing with Ouija boards, which they didn't believe in, or whatever it was. But then what happened was the supernatural shows up. It's like, we're here, and they freak out and they run away because they're not prepared for it. They don't exist in a world where they should happen. So I think they do try to hold, as far as if someone's a materialist, I think they try and hold back a lot because they know as soon as you shake that worldview, right? It's like, well, crap. It's like C.S. Lewis said. Once that worldview is shaken, you go immediately to the Bible. You go immediately to God. Now, you may not end up becoming a Christian or anything, but that's a worldview that if you shake, they're going to go one way.
Right.
So I do think it's a lot more subtle, but I do think that a lot of the, I'm not saying all, but I will never say all or everything of any situation because there's always multiple factors. But I wouldn't be surprised if we can wave a magic wand, so to speak, and know, I would imagine that a lot of people who are materialists that end up doing heinous crimes or committing suicide, that there was a demonic hand present in this. I think a lot of the missing 411 phenomena may actually have more to do with the paranormal, demonic possession than it does necessarily people being taken. Now, I do think there's definitely things where, like, some people are being taken, right? But then there's some of these other associated stories where it's like, hold up, maybe that's not what's happening here. Maybe they're being possessed. And I forget the name of it. But people have been finding a lot of these men around water, right? It's like they're being drowned, and everyone's like, they're being murdered. What if they are just committing suicide randomly? But it's not them choosing to do it. It's that they were out there, and whatever they did made them vulnerable. And so these things happen. We see in the story, oftentimes it's called the story of the lunatic in the Bible, about a young man who was possessed and would often throw himself into the fire, right? And people, a lot of times, actually, a lot of modern translations call him an epileptic. And it's like, well, he was just having seizures. No, that's not what the text says. The text very specifically says he had a demon, and that demon led him to throw himself into the fire. He was trying to hurt the child or this young man.
Right.
We see that with the demoniac. What did he do? He cut himself with sharp rocks. Why? Because the demons, the legion, wanted to hurt the human being. This is an old story. A lot of people who are demon possessed oftentimes behave as if they're insane, and they will cause physical harm to themselves. There's a lot of reasons for this, and that we can talk about that if you like. But the point is, the idea that a lot of people who go off and just start, randomly, it's like they're fine, and then they spill their coffee. Next thing you know, they're taking a hacksaw to their, to their family, and you're like, whoa, we seem to have missed a few steps. Or it's like, it's like everyone's like, I can't believe he committed suicide. He seems so happy. Their friends like, no, he wasn't depressed. Everything seemed fine. Well, why? Because he was fine, except for the fact that he or she was open to this demonic presence, and the demon found them at a very vulnerable time for whatever that is,
right?
And took that extra step. So I do think that I think it's more about how they assault us rather than whether or not they are there, right? It's there. If you're willing to believe that they're there, then I think they're going to be way more willing to do something radical, right? Because you have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
But because, again, like I said, every person I knew who was not a Christian before a supernatural encounter and then became one was like, well, what happened? Well, I was playing with a Ouija board, which is usually when things. It's like by the way, no good story ever starts off with, well, I had a Ouija board.
Yeah.
like it's like there just is. I've never heard a story that starts off with, well, we were playing with this Ouija board and then good things happen. It's always we were, yeah. It's like we were playing with. There was a story I read years ago in Britain. This is entirely off topic, but it's a funny story. So the end result was this guy was being on the day this guy was being sentenced for animal cruelty. His house burned down, and his wife and daughter were found in their garden, covered in scratches. And you're like, okay, this is weird. What's going on here? You research a little bit, and you find out that what happened was previously their dog had died. And so they decided to hold a seance with a Ouija board for the dog. During the seance, this is the story that the guy gave to the police officer. The dog started talking. So they cut up the dog and it was still talking while they cut it up. Threw it into the blender. Somehow the police found out, and the guy got charged with animal cruelty. Well, on the day that he's being sentenced, the wife and child decided to try and contact the dog again. And all we know is it ends up with them covered in scratches in the garden while the house is burning down.
What the heck?
Exactly. Well, so here's my thing. The reason it stands out is because that was the day I was flipping through it on my phone, and I just saw it. I read the whole thing. I'm like, well, it makes sense. I just kept moving on. Like, it's like it didn't strike me as odd. And it was that moment that I'm like, maybe I'm a little too comfortable with this whole world, with this whole thing, because I'm like, that. I imagine most people would think that was a weird situation, but I'm not, because I've heard enough stories from people who had these kind of encounters. I'm like, yeah, it seems like a normal Ouija board experience to me, and I just kind of moved on with my life. But it was like that was the story that sticks in my head, because it was like, okay, you are in a whole new world now. Yeah. When you can look at that and be like, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Why not?
But so again, it goes back to, please don't play with Ouija boards. Like the paranormal is not something to play with. It does end ugly sometimes. Not every time, but oftentimes.
Yeah, a lot more often than you would like. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So, it is. It is insane, and yet people still keep doing it. We keep selling it, and we're like, hey, here's your witch starter kit at Sephora.
Yeah. Well, it's I guess it's come down to curiosity. I mean, you know, a lot of people would just kind of want to know they just want to know that there's like actually the existence of evil, but you know, to want to know if evil actually exists, then you could have to think that the opposite would have to exist. And for a lot of people, they just they just want to know, that they just don't know what could actually happen, from actually contacting demons or any other kind of things like that.
Yeah.
Especially if they don't believe, like we said, in God, or had any kind of experiences in the past. So to them, they're just like, well, I just want to see if it's real or not. So they jump in head first, and a lot of times it doesn't come out.
Yeah, you pay. Yeah, you pay. You know what? You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Yep.
That's really what it comes down to. But so yeah, the simple fact of the matter is, I think what we're seeing, it's a byproduct of our culture not being open to the paranormal, to the cryptozoological, to the supernatural. Right? It's like it's this materialist Darwinian box. It's like anything that calls this box in question is forbidden.
Yeah.
Well, creatures, we are inquisitive by nature. So we're like, well, but what's on the other side of the box?
Right.
So we're going to look. And so the problem is like, even churches don't want to talk about this stuff.
Nah.
Like most of the time I'm talking to a lot of people who I'm talking to who are having problems with like, the shadow people, or the sleep paralysis and stuff like that. They're like, well, I went to my pastor, he said I was crazy, or I need to go see a psychiatrist. Or I'm like, you claim to believe a book that talks about floating axe heads and talking donkeys and people raising from the dead, and you don't know what to do with this stuff. Like, it's literally written down for you how to handle this. Like, I've helped a lot of people who've had problems with sleep paralysis and demonic interventions, and it's like, this isn't hard stuff to deal with. It's all literally written down. Like, it's right there. Just if you read it, you'd be fine.
Wow.
But yeah, like even the church doesn't want to talk about it. So it's like, if it's sort of like the old story, like when you're a parent, they're just like, look, you got to talk to your kids about drugs and sex, because if not, they're going to learn about it from your friends,
Yeah.
right? And essentially, that's what this is like, as a society, we're like, we don't want to talk about the paranormal or the cryptozoological. So where do we find out about it? Well, with our friends, apparently with their magic witch set that they bought at Sephora.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I mean, a lot of priests and a lot of people that are in the church today don't even believe in the devil, and they don't. A lot of them aren't
Yeah.
even Christian, so it's let that sink in for a lot of people. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I would think back in the day, 50s, 60s, and 70s, they would have like an exorcist in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
dioceses, like around the country. But
Oh
now
yeah.
you can't even find on the West Coast. You can't find not even one, let
Yeah.
alone a handful of like anywhere throughout the country. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Oh,
I'm
and what's funny is
surprised.
the Catholic Church is begging for them. They're like, we got more business than we know what to do with.
Yeah.
And so they're even reaching out to other denominations, like, look, we will teach you how to handle this stuff. And I'm over here like, guys, it's not that hard. Like, it really isn't that hard to deal with. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some that are really, takes a lot of work, but 9 times out of 10, this is an easy fix. It's not that hard. But the
Yeah.
point still stands. Our
Yeah.
culture doesn't want to talk about this stuff, and so it goes unspoken. And I think there's a lot of people for whom their lives have been damaged by whether it's a paranormal encounter or a cryptozoological encounter. Right? I know people whose lives were ruined because they saw Bigfoot,
Mm.
because it scared, because it terrified them. Uh, Actually, I don't want to. I don't know if I want to use his name online. But he there was a gentleman who was really terrified by the encounter that he had, and basically gave him PTSD. And this is a very common story. Carryover at Bigfoot Odyssey. He tells a story. It's very similar, that he was out hunting and this thing stands out and he screams at him, and he talks about his face contorting. It terrified him, and then they started harassing him, because once they let you know they're there.
Yeah.
Again, I'm assuming that Bigfoot, at least the actual physical Bigfoot, is a physical thing, but it's like once their cover's blown, they'll harass you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he has PTSD. There's a lot of people who've encountered Bigfoot or some of these other creatures that have PTSD because of the nature of the encounter.
Yeah.
But they can't. It's ruined. People's lives have been ruined because they're like, they try and tell somebody about what's happening to them, and everyone looks at them like they're crazy.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Because like, well, Bigfoot's not real. Well,
Oh,
guess
yeah.
what? It really is. And the problem is he's kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
you know?
A lot from like what I hear, there's people like in both camps, right? A lot of them will say that they had like an encounter and everything was fine, and they were nice and things like that. But then on the other hand, if a lot of the people that are watching right now, you remember our first interview with Dark Waters, he had that story about um, that, I guess, real estate agent went into this house where they were trying to sell the house, and the house was still like when the people who lived in it prior were still living there. Like all their belongings were still there and everything. And it looked like they just got up one day and just walked out of the house without anything. And the lady looked out the back window, and there was a Bigfoot standing at the back door looking through the glass at her. And then one of the guys, they think, I guess one of her partners that she was working with actually went to the house as well. And he went up on the roof and he found a human thumb in the gutter with a bunch of shotgun shells. So he was thinking that whoever was at the house, whoever owned
Wow.
the house, made a last stand or something on the roof, because there
Uh-huh.
were shotgun shells all in the gutter, all on the roof, and like all around the house. So they either came down from from the woods wherever they were up into the house and took the family, or the family got out of there before they came. But either way, something
Someone,
major
some, yeah,
something happened.
someone lost a thumb over that.
Yeah, something major happened. I mean, yeah, I mean, stuff like that. It's crazy.
So here's this is what I hate, is like, you hear these stories and you're like, it's like these people are shaken, and you're like, why can't we get a good photograph of these things, right?
Yeah.
And this goes back to my whole question: is like, what if there are multiple types? Like, there's the actual physical Bigfoot, but then there's paranormal Bigfoot.
Mm.
Who knows what? Like, what if it's not actually Bigfoot? It's a paranormal creature. It's just we call it Bigfoot because it kind of looks like a Sasquatch,
Right.
right? But what if these are two different things, right? So it's like there's a physical thing that's walking around just being an ape, but then there's this other thing that's out there. It's paranormal. It is evil. It does have intentions towards us. Like maybe that's what's happening here. And this is, I was just talking to the guys over at True Horror Stories of Texas, and they had a story about what they originally sort of described as a dog man, but it had goat feet. It had like hooves.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay. It's like, don't get me wrong, dog man's weird enough on its own, but now it's dog goat man, like goat dog man. Like what do we do with this? And it's like, it would be easy to write all this off as crazy, except yeah, I mean, every once in a while you run across enough physical evidence, you're like, okay, something happened here. This is not, this is not just everyone making up stories.
Yeah.
People are being hurt by this stuff. So yeah, I mean, again, I think the problem is the world's bigger than we want it to be.
Mm.
Oftentimes, again, like I said, I'd be real happy if I found out Bigfoot's just an ape. Like
Yeah.
that makes like, if everyone else is crazy and he's just an ape that's out there just doing his thing, he just doesn't want to be bothered. Great,
Right.
I'm happy. But at this point, I gotta ask, like, what's this other stuff? Like, there's some of this stuff that's connected to UFOs, and they're clearly antagonistic towards you. It's like, hold up, there's this other stuff that's going on. We gotta address it as well. Again, this is far afield the book, except to say that the book does talk about if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, you have reason to keep your eyes open.
Yeah. Definitely.
Stop and smell the bluebonnets. Just
a little bit.
Pay attention. Just be a little bit more aware, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and everybody out there, speaking of the book, Metroplex Monsters, Dallas Demons, Fort Worth Goatmen, and Other Terrors of the Trinity River. You can find that book on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com as well. We'll have those linked down in the description as well. Also, as we wrap up here, sir, can you also let us know when you're going to be on? You just mentioned that you were on another YouTube channel as well. Is that the same one from earlier?
Yeah, Texas Front Porch. Yeah, I'm on every Monday at 6:30 Central Standard.
Okay, Central Standard Time. Yeah, so we'll have all the links below because I know you sent on all those over to us as well. Everybody, those will be linked down in the show notes as well. We'll have those linked. And I guess, do you have any other plans, sir, for another book or anything like that, or is this kind of?
Well, honestly, I'm really just trying to get through this one right now. Unfortunately, work's really crazy right now, and I've got some other projects I need to resolve. I actually am thinking about doing, once this is all sort of settled down, maybe spring of next year, doing a follow-up to my to a booklet. It's more of a booklet I wrote like 2 years ago. It's called How UFOs and Bigfoot Prove the Bible is True. And so I may do a follow-up on that, because it seems like no matter what I do, all of these, like I'm trying to go talk about Metroplex Monsters and about the fact that you can find a Bigfoot next to your Whataburger.
Right.
And everyone's like, but how does God factor into this? And I'm like, okay, I get I get it. You know what? I called myself a biblical paranormal researcher for a reason, and that seems to be the thing everyone wants to talk about. So I think I'm going to do a follow-up, more of an expansion of that book.
Right.
I have another book. It's sort of a compilation of these other books I wrote. It's called the 2017 and Beyond Tetralogy. It's about eschatology. And some things, and what's funny is a lot of things that are happening now I wrote about in the book back in 2014.
Right.
So I'm going to do probably an expansion of how UFOs and Bigfoot Prove the Bible is True, and then maybe update that other book as well, probably next year.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we're definitely looking out for that in the future then. But definitely everybody, please go ahead and jump on that book that we have linked down below as well. And also the YouTube channel every Monday as well. 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll have those linked down below so everybody can go ahead and take a look. But Mr. McLean, I really appreciate your time, sir. And we had some great stories, and we'll definitely be looking out for those books as well in the future, any future projects as well. But really appreciate your time. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Paul, man. Let me know if you ever have any. If you want to have me back, I'll be happy to talk about Whataburger and Bigfoot. Or
definitely have to have you back for the whole God
Exactly.
theory and where that all fits in. But
Yeah.
that'll definitely be good. Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep in touch, and we'll definitely have you back on because I want to say there's more questions and answers here, and I have a whole bunch of questions for the future. So
Hey, I love questions, so ask away.
yeah, definitely. We'll have to have you back on then, and then we'll do it again, hopefully real soon. And you're actually not too far from me, so hopefully we'll get something going there as well. But
There you go.
I'm out here closer to Rockwall, but it's not too far. But yeah, everybody, we really appreciate you guys' time. We appreciate everybody stopping in as well. Like I mentioned before, if you guys are watching us on YouTube right now, please hit that subscribe button for us and the bell icon as well. If you guys are on the go, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. We'll have all of our social media linked down below as well. And like I mentioned before, if you guys have any questions for myself or comments for myself or our guests, you can reach us on thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. Really appreciate you guys stopping in. Like I mentioned before, everybody stay safe out there, stay blessed, and stay frosty, everybody.